Drummers Universe.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen at Drummers Universe, I'm back here again with another awesome podcast. Today I'm speaking to Matt Tecu. He's a man I'm very excited to talk about with his background in recording and touring and all things professional really in the drumming world. You may not have heard his name in the past, but you should. I think you're going to, once you start watching this, you're going to realise how much this man has contributed to music, but also how knowledgeable he is on the subject of the professional life of a drummer. To get ready to step into the world of the professional recording and touring session drumming sort of universe, as it were, the part of the drumming that some people don't really get to see. Matt Tecu is based in Los Angeles, and Matt's drumming journey spans Grammy-nominated albums and iconic soundtracks. And he is about to launch a really, really interesting podcast that is going to be called a podcast episode called Lightning in a Bottle, which is going to be on the podcast called Hi, My Name is Matt, which you can find on Spotify. And is it across multiple platforms? That's
Spotify, Apple,
so
Amazon, and I've even started putting them on YouTube now. So
wonderful. So choose your platform, basically, and turn up and you can check that out. So look out for Hi, My Name is Matt. And this podcast episode is going to be called Lightning in a Bottle. So this is his own podcast where Matt actually sort of tells stories a lot of the time. It's a very playful, artistic podcast. It's very interesting. If you want a bit of a unique angle as a podcast, you won't find anything quite like it as far as drummers' podcasts are concerned. But I'm particularly interested in listening to this podcast because I like hearing about this kind of stuff. So from studio sessions to life on the road, Matt's stories are a must-hear for any of you drummers out there. If you're a beginner and you just want to know a bit more about how this stuff works, or if you're a professional drummer and you just want to know more about the kind of the things that go on for drummers like Matt Tecu, who's been very busy. He's got how many credits is it now, Matt? You've got a ton of credits, haven't you?
I just saw that it was 444 album credits, and some of those are singles, and some of those are full albums, and so
it's a very symmetrical number there. So
over a 30-something year period.
Yeah. So
I started recording when I was 15. So
wow.
Yeah.
So there you go. So this is going to be a wonderful conversation. It's going to be a lot for Matt to share with us as far as his wisdom in the journey he's been on. And it's really a teaser, and I highly recommend that as well as checking out anything in this podcast, you definitely go and check out Lightning in a Bottle and go a little deeper with what Matt has to share over there. So enjoy our podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Matt. It's an honor to sit here with you and have a chat about all these things. Thank you for coming in.
The honor is mine. Thank you for having me.
Good sir. Right. So I'm going to kick this thing off with some questions, but is there anything you want to add to the introduction or anything you want to talk about before I begin, trying to dig out the wisdom?
No, I mean, let's just get right in it.
Excellent. Okay, so before we kick off, it'd be nice to hear a little bit about your journey, really. So can you share some pivotal moments from your path as a session drummer that helped shape your career? Like, how did you navigate the transition from playing in bands to becoming a sought-after session musician? What was this? And you started at 15.
Well, honestly, my first foray into it, first of all, I was a really lost juvenile delinquent child. I found the bad kids more fascinating than the good kids. So I was getting into trouble at an early age, trouble with the police, trouble at school. And so my parents shipped me away to a boarding school where they figured I could be safe in the woods, in the wilderness, in this small boarding school. And I took acid one night. I was high on LSD, and I crawled to the roof of the school to see the stars, which one would do, when you're on acid. And I heard music coming from this room. So I crawled across the roof, and I pried the window open and crawled in behind a drum set. And I picked up sticks and started playing when somebody was playing guitar in the room. And after we finished the jam session, he said, we're going in the studio next week. Would you like to record with the band? I said, oh no, I'm not a drummer. I'm just on acid. And he said, well, you're better than our drummer. And so that was my first session, just a few days after I first played drums. Now, I'd always banged on things. And I want to say up front that, yes, this actually happened, but I don't condone drugs or drinking. I've been sober 22 years now. So it's not something that I would recommend. It's just what happened to me.
Yeah.
And it opened the door. And then I realized, and I wasn't any good. I just realized I enjoy this, people like it, so I'm going to work really hard at it. And that's was the beginning at 15. So my first session was, I was a 15-year, but I was in a real recording studio with,
Amazing.
tracking rooms and mics and a soundboard, and
Wow.
it was the real thing. And I just love that environment. I love the cables and the microphones and the headphones, and I just love, at the end of the day, you've created something, you've made something,
I mean,
that's
can I
supposed to
just
sound effortless.
can I double check something with you as well? Because just to understand the context of this, how long had you been playing drums for before you turned up to that random night that this all happened? What kind of preparation went into that moment?
None. I'd always had instruments, but I had no mentors in my family. There's no musicians in my family. There's none in my neighborhood. So I had nobody to really latch onto.
Right.
But I'd always loved music.
Wow.
I would sit in my room as a small child and I felt like I understand the language of it,
Yeah.
although I didn't have any skills to have a voice of my own. So I would buy guitars and learn chords and things, and I was always banging on things. So I always had music just swimming around in my brain. But I'd never, until that night, I never really had a way to express myself with it,
Wow. So are you telling me that you had perhaps tapped stuff out wherever you were, but you hadn't actually had you sat behind a drum set before that moment?
I could sit down from day one. I could sit down and just play a beat. Dum dum tat, dum dum tat, digga 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 digga,
Oh, wow.
And I thought everybody could do that. Apparently
Interesting.
not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was just something my brain instantly knew what goes where and why. But I wasn't
Gotcha.
any good. I mean, I have the recording from that session, and it's awful. But it was, to me, it's beautiful in the sense that, oh, that was my introduction
That's
to
amazing.
this whole world. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what a way to birth into this process. So, sorry, I wanted to interrupt just to get that context so I understood. So, bringing you back to what you were saying, you were talking about how much you love the process of creation and being involved in that, in all of this environment. I'll bring you back there. What were you saying about that?
Yeah. About the actual studio.
Yeah, so it attracted you, this whole process of creation and everything else.
Well, growing up listening to albums, I had no idea what goes on behind the scene.
Yeah.
It's like being a movie lover and then visiting a movie set one day and realizing, oh wow, this is what
Yes.
actually goes on,
Yeah.
And so yeah, I loaded because I'd only played in that one room. And so now we load all the gear into a van, we show up at the studio, I unpack, and these engineers start setting up mics and cables and sound baffles and headphone mix, and it was just a whole new world for me, and I loved every aspect of it.
Wow.
And then get going to the mixing part of it, of like, wow, you could turn the snare up and the overheads and so I just found it fascinating and I started making the correlation of all these albums I grew up with. How did they get that sound? Like, what's that? And realizing what went on, what you had to put into it to get the results.
It's such a big deal. I mean, this is something that we could just spend the whole podcast on, really, couldn't we? Because
Yeah.
I mean, I came to this a little later in my journey of actually becoming really deeply involved in the post production and the whole process of the creation of a record, because normally I would just show up and play the drums and someone else took care of it. But as time's gone on, I've gone on to sort of start recording my own stuff and trying to work with my own drums. And there's so much that goes into that. You have to think about where it's going to end up before you even begin, don't you? The By the sounds of it, you have a deeper knowledge of, how you're going to tune it, what sort of cymbals you're going to select, what snare you're going to select, and all of that
Well, see,
stuff.
that's the part
Yeah.
I love.
Yeah.
The technical engineer, like these days with technology,
Yeah.
your average teenager has more high-tech gear in their bedroom than I did, growing up. So
Yeah.
I'm not very technical minded. So to this day, I'm like, that's your job. This is my job. And it's to a fault, because I kind of wish I'd learned more of the technical engineering aspect of it. So I don't really self-record much. What fascinated me was the role of drums in a song, in the music.
Yeah.
And that was always the challenge to me, to come up with a cool drum part. I like playing drums in a song. And so I don't know if a lot of drummers will relate to this, but you could put me in the nicest drum room with the nicest drum set and put me in there alone. And after about a half hour, I'm bored. Like, I like to accompany something. Even if I'm driving in my car and I'm at a turn signal and the clicking, I start playing on the steering wheel. Like, I need to accompany something. I don't really enjoy playing drums alone. I mean, I will do it, and you have to do it. You have to practice. There's no replacement for putting time in the chair, practicing your rudiments and all this to just get the machine of your body in shape to do the job that you want to do. And the job I like to do is come up with a drum part for a song, to try to find how the drum, because drums are the only instrument that's not playing melody. I mean, per se, you can tune your drums to a note and things like that, but really, more often than not, it's the texture that supports the melody. It's the kind of foundation that the songs can sit on. So this podcast, I didn't want to get too technical with it. I wanted to more talk about the spirit of adventure of coming up with the drum part, and to me, that's what excites me, is coming up with something. And even with the gear part of it, I don't think it's, well, I say in the podcast, it's not the drums, it's the drummer.
Yeah.
I mean, I've literally made recordings that were nominated for a Grammy by pulling something out of a trash can and putting a beautiful ribbon mic on it and playing it. And so it's beautiful. Instruments are beautiful for a reason, and legendary instruments, the Black Beauty snare drum is like one of the legendary snare drums that you'll hear on thousands of legendary recordings. But it's not always necessary. We as drummers, we have the ability to hit anything and call it a drum. You can hit a tin can, you can hit the wall, like anything can be a drum. And if placed right in the song and we're captured right, that's why I call it lightning in a bottle. It's you're trying to capture something that's kind of wild and untamed and put it in a situation that's musical,
Absolutely. I mean, your philosophy or attitude towards this, I think, is a crucial attitude or philosophy if you want to create something that's got more uniqueness or character, because of course it's very easy to go for a drum that has been proven to work, that sounds fantastic on all records, but you can add so much personality by trying to make a decision that's a bit off kilter and then making it work, with what you have around you.
I like the word personality, because to me, that's what the drums can provide. If not the melody, they can provide the attitude and personality and the vibe for the melody.
And it's so important. I mean, back along, I think it was at the Boxer where they ended up putting the snare drum in a elevator shaft. I think it was the Boxer. Lie, la, lie. That was
is that how they got that
was done
sound?
in an they did it in an elevator shaft. I believe so.
That's amazing. Well, in one of my favorite drum tracks is Cecilia. From Simon and Garfunkel, and it starts out with it's this kind of wood banging, and the legend has it they were at a party and they were all drumming on the piano bench, the wooden piano bench, and they recorded it, and they actually took that recording and brought it in the studio and built the whole track around it. So it's the actual them drunkenly banging on a piano bench, and that's the intro to the song.
This is perfect. I mean, that's just like Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. That was, I believe that was Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson, and I don't know how many people were sat there, but they were all just banging a bunch of bottles. They were just that dunk, dunk,
and that's what
that whole percussion section is just them banging bottles.
That stuff really excites me. That's the stuff that really, I can go on YouTube and find children half my age or less playing things that are so technical and impressive, and it's like that's another world to me. Like I haven't put in the time to be that flashy and that exciting. I mean, we all have our moments where we're like, okay, I'm in it now, but I'm not that drummer. I like to accompany things, so I like to come up with things that give the song a personality. At the same time, get out of the way of it. So my challenge is, when I was younger, I think it's like any child who's playing sports, playing an instrument, doing whatever they want to. They want to be the best in the world. I wanted to be the best drummer in the world, and I wanted to, which means I wanted to sound the best,
Yeah.
which is fine for a child. As I got older and as I started working and recording, I realized, no, the goal is now I want to make what I play on the drums make you sound good.
Yeah.
So if you're the bass player or the singer or whatever, I want to come up with something that enhances and complements what you're doing. And then I found out that ironically, that's when I sound best.
Yeah.
When I'm playing something that makes the musicians around me sound better. And ideally, that's what a great band does, is everybody's playing something that enhances the person next to them. And so it's like a chemistry. That's why chemistry is like key. You can't really fake it, you know. That's what, you know, when
100%.
you see these great groups that are amazing, and then you take a member from each one of them and build a super group, and it's not as good as any of the other groups. I mean, because it just didn't have that chemistry, you know.
Again, that's a form of lightning in a bottle, isn't it? That you're kind of referring to there. That very grouping is kind of a lightning in a bottle. It's like a chemistry that could that's in something of its own, has its own life, its own nature
Yeah,
that you can't
and that's why I
necessarily
called it
recreate
lightning.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I call it lightning in a bottle, because you're capturing something and preserving it,
Yeah.
and then you're capturing a wild moment.
Yeah.
I love producers. I love producers that record everything. Like I did a lot of work with Daniel Lanois, who's a producer that he's done a lot of U2 records, Bob Dylan, Neville Brother. He's produced everybody, but he likes to record everything. And so when I go into his studio and I'm tuning the drums, he's recording it, you know.
Oh, right. I see what you
And
mean now. Wow.
and
Okay.
he might use that. He might use a snippet of it
Right.
as a loop in another song somewhere else. So he just likes
Gotcha.
to catalog and capture moments in the studio, even if it's not the take. You know what I mean? Like we're all ready and we count it out, and we're in the song. But before that, there's just a lot of kind of tapping around, getting sounds, and he's recording all of it. So I kind of like that idea of just capture everything. You know, you never know. You never know when magic's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean it's a very avant-garde mindset, right? To record the room, and as you say,
Yeah.
there's always these little sounds that you take for granted that may end up being perfect for a section of a
Well, what
song or something.
happens
Yeah.
is you're
Right.
relaxed when you're doing it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, I found the worst way to be great is to try to be great. Like
Yeah.
the best thing you can do, this is what years of doing this has taught me. Almost everything is done better when you're relaxed.
Yeah.
And I don't care if it's high tension music with energy and you're hitting hard. It's like, it's still better when you're relaxed when you do it.
Yeah. 100%.
You know, the trying to be great almost denies the greatness. You know, you just have to let it flow and
So
capture it.
what you're saying essentially is kind of like Kenny Warner's like effortless mastery mindset, where it's all about getting out of your head and not letting that be the leading factor in how you play, but being really feeling what you're doing and being present with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The worst thing I can do is worry about, is this good?
Yeah.
Will people like it? These are things that I should be worrying about later, after the fact.
Yeah.
But
Edit later. Yeah.
in the creative process, you should be free. And we all know. I mean, we should all be talented enough to realize when it's shit. You know, some days I just don't have it. Some days I go in there and no matter what I do, nothing seems to work. And I know it. And it's so frustrating and heartbreaking to me. But then there's other days where I feel like I can do no wrong. Like everything's just falling into place. It's
Yeah.
just, you know, but I'm not
But
a
it sounds like
drummer.
you've been consistently able to adapt to the project, because I mean, you got 444 credits for a reason. I mean, you've obviously got a knack for listening to and being perceptive and sensitive to the aims and goals of the artist's story, or what they're trying, the vibe they're trying to produce.
It helps. With lyrics, I was always the last to understand what the song was about, because I would listen to the lyrics and the singing, the vocals, as another instrument.
Yeah.
But to actually know what the song is about, I mean,
Yeah.
that can make a big difference.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I asked them, you know, I asked the songwriter, what's the song about? What's this lyric about? Sometimes it's literal, sometimes it's more esoteric, but it helps me as a drummer to know what's the attitude for, like, I always made the analogy that if an album is a movie and each song is a pivotal scene in the movie, I'm not the actor or the director. I'm the lighting special effects guy. I will light the scene with light and shadows and give an attitude to it. So is it a love scene? Do you want soft lighting and smoke and shadows and, you know, sensual vibe, or is it an action adventure scene? You want flames and explosions, and, you know,
Yeah.
I can provide all that with the drums, all
Yeah.
that attitude. And so that's kind of well, that's what the interest for me. That's where I really perk up and get excited about it. You
It's a
know,
great analogy because I think sometimes when someone's visual, when you break something down in a visual way, it just helps to frame and understand what we're really talking about here. I think that was wonderful. Like, because in essence, as a supporting participant in the writing process, more often than not, as drummers, we're not writing the lyrics, we're not writing the chords, so therefore, more often than not, the emotional content or the fundamental story of the piece is something we're complementing rather than creating. So
right?
it's such a great analogy to think of it as like lighting or background based elements. I mean, music itself is a background component of the story, but without it, you wouldn't feel anywhere near the same amount of emotion in certain scenes. I mean, our favorite actors wouldn't draw the same
It's
feeling out
the
of us.
it's
Yeah,
yeah, it's the light and shadows of our job.
yeah,
You know,
and
so
it
yeah.
enhances and takes something that was already beautiful and it blows it up into something even greater. That's the goal, right? To turn it into something even bigger than
Well, and
even better than it was. Yeah.
that's why in recording, one of the greatest tools we have, one of the greatest drums or percussion instruments we have is silence.
Yeah.
Where do you place the silence?
Yeah.
You know, and so like I love the quote of Miles Davis apparently said that he judges drummers like boxers. They got to know when to duck and get out of the way, and they got to know when to step in and clean up.
Yeah.
So to pick your battles, pick your spots. That's the strategy of recording a drum track
Yeah.
is how to hold it and cradle it, and you know, and not just be so drummer about it, you know,
Mm.
because drummers, I always like to say, I want to play in the song, not at the song, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. hundred
I don't
percent.
want to I don't want to fight with the song. I want to kind of and so I've found over the years, like I see a lot of these drummer forums where people post pictures of the kits and they have 12 cymbals on the kit. I'm like, 12 cymbals, like that's a producer's nightmare, like having to mix 12 bash, bash, bashy, bashy, bash. At least in the sessions I do, there's always a time and a place for everything. There's no
Of
rules.
course.
I want to
Yeah.
say that wholeheartedly, that there are no rules. You know, there is a time to bash, but more often than not, when I'm working with like singer songwriters, I try to do things like I've done albums where I tried to not hit a crash cymbal the whole album. Now, of course, I failed, but when I finally did hit a crash cymbal, I really meant it. Like
Yeah.
I set it up, and it was very dramatic. Dum boom boom ba doom, and it just all of a sudden there's just this explosion in the track, this air, this kind of ambience in the track. But if I'm just crashing after every measure,
Yeah.
it kind of loses its importance and its value. It's just overused. So to me, less is more most of the time,
Yeah.
you know. Like let the song do what it wants to do. The song should, if you know how to listen to a song, being a studio drummer, the song will tell you exactly what it needs, you know, because the instruments can only do so much. One of my favorite drummer quotes, and a lot of drummers hate this quote, but it's Chet Baker, who I have a picture of up there.
Amazing.
He said, "It takes a really good drummer to be better than no drummer at all." Now he was doing soft jazz, so I see
Amazing.
where he's coming from, but I take it as if you're not going to bring something special and necessary to the party, then just don't come. You know,
Yeah.
like you're just going to get in the way of the song. But if you can get underneath it, enhance it, to me, I always say the job is to accompany, support, enhance, and hopefully elevate the melody
Yeah.
or the song. Drums can do that, or they can get it and step all over it and ruin it.
Yeah.
You
How do
just
you know the difference? Like, so I think for you, you've had a lot of experience. You've worked with numerous artists who have, I imagine, given you some constructive feedback from time to time on what they would like to hear or have happen in the song, right? And
well,
for you,
one of my favorite quotes about that is somebody said, "People only remember how you made them feel.
yeah,
They don't remember what you did or what you said. You think they do, but they didn't. They don't really. What they remember is how you made them feel."
yeah,
And so I look at that when I'm in the studio. So working with artists, uh, usually I'm not paying for the session. It's not my session. I'm not producing it. I'm not the songwriter.
yeah,
So my job is to make everybody else's job easier and to make them feel better about what they're doing. And if I can do that with my presence and my drumming, then they tend to want to hire you again.
yeah,
So how do I know if it's happening? I know because they tell me. and
yeah,
and if they don't like it, doesn't the hard, there's a hard moment when I get too emotionally attached to a part. Like, I think this is a great idea of mine,
yeah,
and I really want to go for it 100%, to find out the producer or the songwriter are like, I don't like it.
yeah,
And it's like heartbreaking because you have to leave your ego out. It's not my session. I
yeah,
don't own it. I'm not paying for this. I didn't write this song. So if they don't like it, then it's not good. And that's just part of, you have to not get too emotionally attached. That, like, don't be so precious about everything. Just like flow like water,
yeah.
don't resist. So I just try to play things that make other people feel good about the whole situation, you know.
And one of the things I do with students to help them, like in the Trinity syllabus, right? Because I don't know if you know aware, but I teach drums and I've been for the last decade.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and in the Trinity syllabus, which is one of the syllabuses for teaching students up to like grade 8 and stuff, they have like 3 criteria of like fluency and security, technical control, and then communication and style. So in communication, I always end up workshopping with students a little bit when they're not necessarily privy to this, especially as they're getting a little further into the journey, to just sit down and actually kind of take a few breaths, relax their head, relax their whole body, and get centered and hear and feel what the music's doing, what the music's trying to tell them. Because I think sometimes we try to get too much information from the lyrics and not enough from what the music's actually saying as itself, right? Because there's always that contrast.
Right,
There's always possible contrast between the lyrical content and the emotional vibe or story of the music itself, right?
right.
So until you tap into that, you don't really know what your job is. So do you have, for me, I know personally that that has a massive impact on the decision making process for me. If I can get into feeling the music as deeply as possible, and for me that's a heart centered thing, and you try to get into your body and so maybe dance a little bit. I don't know, it depends on your process, but I'd love to hear more from you about how you like to kind of get yourself into what you're playing, so you really have as much empathy as possible and you start to really get the sense of what's required to make that song work.
Well, I believe the answer to that is everybody's different.
Yeah,
So, but I've learned about myself that some of my favorite ideas and greatest successes, meaning it worked, they liked it. That's when you know it's a success. They've come from my initial gut reaction,
yeah,
meaning the times when I've overthought things,
yeah,
it just got worse and worse and worse and more diluted. So I often try to just, when I hear a song, say I'm in a session and they play me the song, I've never heard the song before. They play me and I have just a piece of paper where I write down just quick notes. I mean, I can read charts, but I like to not,
yeah,
because then I'm playing like that. It affects the sound of how I'm playing. So I just get a
yeah,
big Sharpie because I'm old and I can't see far. So I just write out, the roadmap of the song, verse, chorus, verse,
yeah,
and then I write little side notes of, like, some of them aren't even musical. They're just like, excitement. Um,
yeah,
I just write almost like a director would tell an actor how to get into character for the scene. I look at it as it's getting into character for the song, and like back to the analogy of the movies. Some movies are a period piece. Like, I did this album It was an album, and then we did a movie, which is now you can watch online, called Echo in the Canyon. And it was about the 60s folk rock scene out of Southern California from Laurel Canyon. And in that project, I got to record with Neil Young, Beck, Fiona Apple, Nora Jones, Regina Spektor, Cat Power, like all these big stars, and but the project itself was recreating this sound of the 60s folk rock, like the Byrds and the Buffalo Springfield. And I wasn't there. I mean, I was a baby. So I had to get into character as if I'm, I have to set the scene. And I didn't want to play what those drummers in the 60s did. Like, I didn't want to take their fills and their things. I wanted to get the kind of essence of it, the vibe of it, and get into character so I could provide this attitude. And when I was listening to these like early 60s recordings, the originals, first of all, a lot of it was the Wrecking Crew. So it was Hal Blaine, like the Byrds albums that they would have the Wrecking Crew playing on it. But the ones that didn't, like Arthur Lee and Love, they would use their own drummer. And these were like, you'd be hearing it and they would do a fill that made no sense to me. And I loved that it was so wacky at a time when you could put a wacky part on a big record on the radio. Like these days they won't let that stuff fly as much. So I wanted to get into character of how to that, like, I didn't want to play what they were playing, but I wanted to play something that had the similar vibe, play that record. So doing things like recording the whole kit with 2 or 3 mics like they used to do.
Yeah.
So it didn't sound too contemporary. I wanted it to be believable and get into character.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, it was an exciting challenge to do that and to get that vibe, because I'm not a 60s drummer, and the sound was of brilliant young musicians that were high on drugs. That was the sound of a lot of those old records.
Yeah. Yeah. Wild energy, very.
And I don't do
sometimes
drugs, so I
unhinged.
wanted to get into character of that,
Yeah. And the
But
recording
that would
man
go
is
for any
easy to
session. Like, what you find when you get into a session, like, what's the attitude, what's the vibe of this? Some of it's straight up country, some of it's straight up punk rock, and so you got to get into character. Like, I've done everything. I've done punk rock records, I've done country records, I've done reggae records, soul records, funk records, classical, jazz. I mean, I'm not even a jazz player, but I have ears. I can play things that sound like jazz. Now, a real jazz purist would be like, oh, that guy's jive. But your average listener, it's like, it's jazz. I mean, to me, the beauty of music is that's the litmus test. If it sounds good, it is good. It doesn't matter if it's correct. Like, I don't look, I'm not trying to play correctly. I'm trying to see what I can get away with. I often tell people my goal is to play the wrong shit in the right way. Because growing up, that's my favorite drum tracks. Listening to these old blues recordings of, like, they just turned the beat around and they all went with it. Like it was okay. Like, that's amazing to me. That's exciting to me, that, or like, Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys would stack all these different instruments on top of each other to get one sound. I'm like, so you end up thinking, like, that's an amazing drum part. What is that? Like, what is that sound? What are they banging on? These are the things that excite me when I'm doing a drum track, so it's not just kick, snare, hi-hat. It's like kick, snare, hi-hat, where I will put a tambourine on the floor tom, hit it with a maraca, play the mallet on the snare, with also holding a brush, and then overdub finger snap, like all these. It's the strategy of building this percussion track that's interesting. That's all really what I'm looking to do, is do something that I think is interesting.
That's great. Yeah, I saw an example of this circulating recently. I think it's Owner of a Lonely Heart, where there's a cowbell part that was, or was a woodblock or something, and they pitched it. So the engineer
saw that.
you saw that, and he pitched it to follow the melody kind of alongside with the guitar line, and it kind of, you can't even hear it properly. It's kind of it's so within the track that it adds an extra dynamic of vibe to the track, but you're not necessarily conscious of it.
Right, right.
Those
Well,
kinds
I
of
mean,
those kinds
that
of
reminds
decisions,
me.
and Diamond Dogs, for example, where he reverses the groove, is a more obvious version of that, right? Where it's just like
Yes.
out of nowhere, the whole groove is reversed backwards, and then it goes back onto the one again, and you're just like, what? If you're like, don't know what is going on, it's very disorientating, and then
Or
the
the
one comes back, yeah.
Eric Clapton Bell Bottom Blues, where Jim Gordon, the drummer, the legendary session drummer, he plays it backwards. Like instead of it's like it's he flips it around.
Yeah.
But the cowbell thing, it reminds me of a story. There's a producer, Joe Barresi, I've worked with. Now, Joe has done all the early Queens of the Stone Age. He's done a bunch of Tool records,
Oh, amazing.
and more of kind of a metal guy.
Yeah.
And we were recording an album for Pearl a Day, who's Meatloaf's daughter,
Right.
and with her husband Scott Ian from Anthrax. So it was a heavy record,
Yeah.
and there was a song, I think it was a song that had like Ted Nugent on guitar on it. But afterwards, we were doing percussion, and so I was like, it could really use a cowbell on this song. And he's like, yeah, but I don't have one at the studio. Do you have one? I'm like, no, I don't have my stuff. And I said, wait, what if I just go,
By the way, because of a
and he's
ring
like,
sound, we can't hear those noises at the moment. But for those who aren't
oh,
listening, that was I was pretty sure that was a verbal impersonation of a cowbell that went on. But yeah, it's not
yes.
yeah, yeah.
And I said, it's not coming through.
No, no.
All
But
right.
I just want to make sure
All
people
right.
know that you just
It's me
basically
clucking.
verbalized it. Yeah.
It's me clucking with my mouth and my tongue, a cowbell sound.
Yeah.
And he decided, well, let's try it. And he recorded it, and then he pitched it, and then he put reverb on it, and then he compressed it. And it sounded like and within the track, it sounded like a cowbell sound. See, like little days like that, I love, where
Yeah.
we made it happen,
Yeah. That's amazing. And it's funny how that goes. Like sometimes if you've for me personally, I found that we got more experimental sometimes because of my background not being particularly we weren't fluent as a family. I would have to find what I could to cobble together to create the sounds I wanted to. And not that there's a right or wrong way, but it does. I do find this a bit like what Jojo Mayer says. Like the less options you have, the more creative you become. Like you have to, if you only have a high tom and a snare drum,
Absolutely.
you start to have to find new ways of exploring those two drums to make it sound to get all the noises you need to be to be expressive. Yeah.
Absolutely. When I
So,
was first drumming in my mother's basement in her cellar, I was just collecting drum. They were shitty drums, CB700, whatever, just cheap because I didn't have money. But I was collecting things, timbales, congas, bongos, chimes. I'm hanging them from the pipes on the ceiling.
wow.
And then I started gigging every weekend and realizing,
Can't bring it
man,
all.
if I can't do it on four pieces, then I probably shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
So I am of the school like you that uh I playing a smaller drum set makes me more creative. Like people say, like, how do you get a great drum sound? I'm like, man, I can get 100 snare drum sounds out of one snare.
Yeah.
How are you hitting it? What heads do you have on? What's the tuning? Are you dampening it? Do you have an object sitting on top of it? Are you hitting it with a stick or a mallet or a brush or a
Yeah.
broom? Like, or your hands? Are the strainers off? Are the strainers tight? Are the strainers like? There's so
Yeah.
many variables, and you could just hit the side of it, the shell of it, or,
Yeah.
So there's no right or wrong way. It's experiment, keep an open mind, listen, your ears will tell you when, whoa, that's you just perk up and you're like, that feels good, that feels right, and that's what you go for. But no, I don't. When I see pictures of drummers, I mean, God bless them, that have 20-piece kits with 12 cymbals, and it's like, yeah, I don't need all that. First of all, I'm too lazy, I don't want to set all that up, but I don't find it necessary in the context of a song. Now, maybe it's very exciting to do a drum solo
Unless of
on.
course you're doing like dream theater or like when you get into more progressive styles, perhaps it ends up much more.
What's the drummer of Dream Theater? Because he just contacted me recently.
Currently,
He's got
Mike Portnoy's returned. Yeah, it
yes,
was.
Mike Portnoy. Mike Portnoy. I was in this band Mother Superior, and we were the Rollins band for a while with Henry
Yeah.
Rollins. but we never got great success in the States, so we would always go to Europe, and we were really big in Spain. But
Yeah.
we did a handful of records as Mother Superior without Henry. Like, we did records on our own. And Mike Portnoy was apparently a fan and reached out, and he did a post of like, I forgot what a great band this is. I love this band. And so
That's great.
I thanked him. And so now we're kind of friends. And I'm so far from that prog, like I can't do what he can do.
Yeah.
But I found it beautiful that in the drummer community that he respects and enjoys what I do
That's
as
right.
much as I do him. So it's kind of nice. It's right in your name, the Drummers Universe. It's like it's a brotherhood or sisterhood, you know.
Yeah.
It's a community.
I mean, I've been going through for myself recently. I've been going for a diploma. I'm wrapping up fairly soon. It's called an LTCL, which is like the equivalent of a bachelor's or something. And I've been going through a bunch of music from all these different people, like studying a song from Annika Nils. I've been doing a song from Matt Gasker and all this stuff because of the level of playing for these diplomas ends up being pretty elite. So I've had
Right.
to expand my kit to create sound sources that only do certain jobs. Does that make sense? So it's like I don't have like for me at the moment I have 2 crash cymbals, one small, one large. But then it's other sound effects that are required, like at least what I've got one splash, but I've got one trashy I've got a stack on my right that I need for the double
Right.
pedal stuff. I've got one stack on my left that I need for a set. I've got one cowbell on my right because I need one over there for this one. And it's about I think Klaus Hessler, I had an interview with him fairly recently about this, and he has kind of a mirrored kit where he's got like different options based on where he needs to reach to create different sound effects based on the style of music. So in my
Yes.
case, to solve those problems, I had to sort of set my kit up to allow me to play each person's style and to be able to jump from one to the other, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And
And
to
it's
be
like,
open, like,
but in your case, like, you know, a lot of the time, the music that you're playing, as you say, it's not required that you're bringing in this very large amount of gear, and it could actually become a distraction, right? Is that what you're saying? Like it can almost be like there's too
well,
many
I
choices here,
find
and
if
like you need to center down.
I find that if I'm too insistent, on my own sound, like this is the Matt Tecu sound, and this is what you're going to get, and I bring
Yeah,
in the whole Matt Tecu like
yeah,
entourage of drums,
yeah,
then I'm denying myself the beautiful accidents and mistakes that happen or that can happen. Like when I go into a studio, I will bring if I'm doing an album, say I'm doing your album, I will bring in a handful of snare drums.
yeah,
Because first of all, to me, the easiest way to change the whole personality of the kit without changing the kit is just switch out the snare drum. And so I will bring those, but I'm also open to whatever. Like I live in Los Angeles, so a lot of these studios I work with are legendary studios that have gear. They
yeah.
have a room full of cymbals. They have a room full of drums. So, like I was doing this session at Vox Studios, which apparently is the oldest recording studio in the world. It was the
Wow.
old RKO radio studios from like the 30s.
Amazing.
And they's like, don't bring anything. We have a drum room. So I go in there and I look in the drum room and I said, ooh, those old 60s Camcos look cool. Let's pull those out and let's set those up.
Yeah.
And I didn't bring anything. And so we set those up, and then I picked a snare, and it wasn't until after it was set up and mic'd up that the engineers were like, that's one of Jim Gordon's old kits, the legendary recording, so
Goodness me.
I guess the point of my story is you never know what you're going to find in these studios, or don't be so precious of like, you have to, this is my sound and I'm like locked into this. But like you were talking about stacks, like I really want a stack now because I've heard like people do great things with them. It's almost like those old Prince albums where you have hand claps. So I like the stack. And then I just recently did an album. For a while, when I was younger, China cymbals were popular.
Yeah.
And then it kind of grew out of fashion, and I was like, China cymbals are so lame. Well, recently I did an album, and they had a China cymbal in the studio. It's like, let's try it. And it was a soul record, like
Oh, wow.
old soul. But it just needed a at one point. And it wasn't a very dense drum track, meaning there was a lot of air in what I was playing. But just at the end of a phrase to just go, it was perfect. And so now I want to get a China cymbal again. It's been years since I've owned one. So I'm just saying the point is to not be married to it, but use whatever it takes. Do
Yeah,
whatever it takes,
I
you
love that.
know?
That's
Yeah.
yeah. So you, in essence, what you're really doing in many ways is you just play whatever setup is going to be required based on the project, right? You're gonna adapt 100% not only in your playing but in your sound sources and setup based on whatever is going to be needed. And
That's
that's
what's exciting to
yeah,
me. Yeah,
yeah, that's
that's
great.
more exciting than developing the Matt Tecu sound and then
Yeah.
inflicting it on the world. It's like I would much rather have no sound and show up and what's the job? Because I'm a soldier, and so
Yeah,
the job, the session, that's the mission. And so I
yeah,
look at it like that.
love that.
Okay, and I start to think of strategy. Okay, how do I not only survive this but actually excel in this situation?
Yeah.
And what does it need? And you just got to use your ears. You know, like I said, the song will tell you what it needs, and if it doesn't, the producer will.
But there's a lot of
You
fun
know,
in that, right? Because you're allowing in possibilities and sounds that you may never have thought of before, and then you find out it's perfect, and you can't know till you experiment a little bit and massage these possibilities. And with some
that's right.
flexibility, you can gain perspective that otherwise would have been impossible, right?
Yeah, that's right. Sometimes the producer or the songwriter will send me demos. So I arrive at the studio with the game plan. This
Yeah,
is what we're going to do. We're going to set up and then we set it all up. It just doesn't sound good. And so, okay, quickly change, you know, like,
yeah,
and so you have to be able to adapt
yeah,
and be adaptable and not be so precious and insistent on hanging on to something if it's not working, because you should be able, because studio time is expensive, engineers are expensive, musicians can be expensive. So um, I always felt that the energy in a recording session is a relaxed urgency. Like
yeah,
you have to be relaxed, but at the same time, you can't. Like when I hear people taking a day to get a kick drum sound, I'm like, that's ridiculous.
yeah,
Like if you can't get a good kick drum sound, I mean, there's no rules. It takes what it takes, but
yeah,
um, it has to be forward momentum for it. Like we have to get the job done. We can't waste the whole session, everybody standing around worrying about a snare drum sound. Like get your shit together and get on so we could, because there's a lot of moving parts in each session.
yeah,
And so I just like to cover my ground. Like I will get it sounding good. You're the engineer, you set up the mics, you're the producer, you capture it.
yeah,
And I mean, that's why the podcast is lightning in a bottle, because you're capturing something wild and untamed and preserving it and polishing it up to where it's presentable. And because when I record, I often think this will outlive me. I'm not saying it'll be famous and legendary and anybody will hear it. I'm just saying with the internet nowadays, it'll live somewhere online forever, you know, long after I'm dead. And so I don't want the pressure of like, it's got to be good, but I do enjoy the like, you're making something that's going to have a life of its own, and who knows what that life will be. But that excites me,
yeah.
you know.
It's interesting you mentioned this because I saw uh something come up not that long ago talking a little bit about Prince's life and his work as an artist, and that he was known for back in the day booking a studio for one day because it was pretty expensive back then. He'd just go in and he would just knock out an entire song in just a few hours, the whole lot. That he'd record everything, every
Yeah,
part himself, then and produce it and have it all done and dusted and another song done in a single day. And people were like, "How are you doing this?" But I think he had a similar mindset to you in the sense that it was like trying to capture something in its rawness. More often than not, he wasn't doing more than one take. He'd just be like knocking out a single take. He knew what he wanted. He would just knock it out and go, okay, that's what it should be. Move on. Instead of being like obsessing over every tiny detail, he was trying to capture a vision, and then maybe edit later. But more often than not, it would be fine. Once he was done, he was like, no, that's all
you know,
great.
no, there's
Yeah,
I hear a lot of rough edges in his music, and
yeah,
to me his music is perfect.
yeah.
But it reminds me of, I was doing a session once with years ago with David Briggs, who's since passed. But David Briggs produced almost every Neil Young record, definitely every Neil Young and Crazy Horse record.
Right.
And so when you listen to Neil Young records, especially the early ones, they're full of rough edges. And it's not about capturing perfection. It's about, like, when David died, Neil said in an interview, now I won't know which one's the take, because he was my second set of ears. And it was never the take that was the least mistakes or flawless. Uh, it was the one that just had that thing, that
Yeah.
magic, and so uh, I love capturing the rough edges. So that's why I say my job is to see what I can get away with. I'm always trying to push. I'm always trying to fuck it up a little bit.
Yeah.
You create something perfect, and like I like building a drum part, and then like I like constructing it, and I also enjoy deconstructing it. Okay,
Yeah.
let's take this out. Let's remove this part and see what happens. And messing with it till you get different qualities. It's like looking at the same object from different angles.
Yeah.
So
Love that. I mean, it's again, there's so much in these. I mean, I had a bunch of questions prior to this, by the way. I had them all pre-planned, and we've
all
actually
right.
covered by having a chat here. We've covered nearly every single question that I had for you, just being in a
Which proves
general.
my point.
Yeah,
It proves my point. You just
yeah,
gotta flow. You
yeah.
just gotta go for it. Yeah.
Like I always like to pre-plan for these podcasts because sometimes I like to know that there's going to be a backup parachute if I need to direct the conversation a little bit. But it more often than not, when I'm talking to people in these podcasts, it kind of just happens because you get into a free flow of passion about the subject. And again, you edit later, right? I mean, in these cases, I don't edit these. We just put them up and let the world see it. But
Dude, what you're telling
yeah,
me is the perfect analogy for what we're talking about. This
exactly.
is the perfect
Yeah,
analogy for a recording session. You do your homework, you be prepared, you show up on time,
yeah,
and you have your equipment all ready to, in working order, and then you just see what happens. Like,
yeah,
you plan for everything, but you also have to, more importantly than all the planning and preparation, is to having the ability to recognize when something just happens by accident, those
yeah.
happy accidents,
And let it happen and get out of the way
Yeah,
instead of feeling like if I came into this conversation today and I was like, no, I need to ask all these questions in this sequence, it would have interrupted the flow of our conversation. So sometimes you got to know
right.
when to sort of sit back and let what's naturally happen,
Uh,
like and let it
yeah,
let
I
it
mean,
let it give birth to itself to some degree. Like,
but to
yeah,
me, that's the perfect analogy for the whole topic of what we're talking about, which is
yeah,
recording music, and to
yeah,
me, music, the best definition I could come up with, or what is music, um, is it's what feelings sound like.
yeah. I
So
totally agree. Yeah,
So I never get too bogged down in the technical part of music. Sometimes playing technical Mike Portnoy prog rock parts is necessary to get that emotion.
yeah,
Sometimes it's just the opposite. Like I've in my episode, I talk about, I was back when I smoked cigarettes. I was in the alley behind the studio taking a break, smoking a cigarette, and I was leaning against an empty dumpster, a big trash steel receptacle,
yeah.
and I kicked it. Boom!
Mm.
Had this boom sound. I was like, and the next song we were doing was a very creepy, slow, airy ballad, kind of like a Tom Waitsy thing, like dark.
Oh yeah.
And I ran in the studio. I said, "Could we record this?"
Mm.
And so we did. We ran mic cables out and put a mic inside the dumpster. And I sat and I had headphones. We ran headphone cables out so I could hear the track. And then I would just kick it to get this boom sound, and it was amazing. So that was something not planned. I didn't bring a dumpster to the session. It just happened. I just had ears, like,
Yeah,
and I knew the song needed something, and it needed something that was unidentifiable. Like, yeah, bass drums are great. They're all just 26-inch, 22-inch. I just got a 20-inch for that tight thing, but also any object can be a bass drum, if it
yeah.
has a low frequency and you're placing it right in the track. So
What I love
anyway,
about this is that you're again establishing this juxtaposition that goes on between being, and sometimes people lean one personality type or the other. I mean, this for me, this conversation has really led into an interesting place of depth about this. But it's like if you're a professional, it's like I think Stephen King said something along the lines of like they say you need to be inspired to write, write books. It's a good thing that I'm inspired at exactly 9 o'clock every morning or something like that, to that effect, right? So it's like
Right.
he has a ritual, he has a plan, and he sticks to it, and he writes for the basket, and sometimes it comes out good, sometimes it doesn't, but he's always turning up, right? And he's always
Right.
knocking out the writing. And with what you were saying, there's this professionalism component where it's like turn up on time, do your homework, listen to the track, do all of the pre-prep. But then the hardest thing about that is that if you're the kind of personality that tends to lean in that direction, you may have a tendency also to want to control the outcome. So,
Yes.
and then on the other side of the equation, we have the people that may lean towards being more free and unstructured, who perhaps struggle to plan their time a little more, or perhaps struggle to pre-plan and pre-prep and get their head in the space. So it's like you want both. It's like
Well, yeah,
you
you're
want both,
creating
right?
art. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
you want
creating art,
both.
and I look at the job of creating art as making order out of chaos and
Yeah,
making chaos out of order.
I love that.
So, if something's very order, bring a little chaos to it, and if something's very chaotic, bring a little order to it. And like I
That's
started doing
really
art
interesting.
recently, and I don't know what
Yeah.
I'm doing. But I'm painting and all this. And there's a famous artist that I was a fan of, and so we started talking online. And she gave me this great piece of advice that I use in music or anything creative. She said, "Don't look at it as like you're making something." Um, and this was in regards to painting. uh, she said, look at it like you're casting spells. And I'm like, oh, I like that. So it's not about, is this good? Uh, it's letting go of all the plans and just trying to cast a spell as if I'm a wizard. And that's kind of how I like any creative foray that I get into, is I'm casting spells. And in the job of recording music, you're recording, you're capturing that spell, you know.
So in essence, you're getting at the concept of getting out of your head and going directly to the source of what the intent is, and nurturing
If
that.
it's like, how does it make you feel? That's what I try to
Yeah,
pay attention to, because there's good and bad and all that, but there's so much judgment involved in what's good
yeah,
and what's bad,
yeah.
or what's going to be successful or not successful. I
Hmm.
listen to the track after I just did a drum track, and the producer says, come on in to the control room and let's listen to it, and we'll decide whether we need to do another one or do it a different way.
Mm,
And when I listen to it, and I try to listen to it with, how does it make me feel?
yeah,
And if you look around the room, especially with drums, and bodies are moving, even if it's just someone's fingers moving, it's like
yeah,
you notice the physical reaction that the music's having on the room and everybody in it.
yeah,
And that's what's important,
yeah.
because drums is a dance. And so
Mm,
we're the ones that we can provide rhythm to me is like, there's a sound, but then if there's two or more sounds, that's a rhythm. There's a rhythm to that, the space between the sounds.
yeah.
And so that's our job, the master of that. If we can provide that, and give that attitude to the melody, and then be aware enough to see what's the reaction, how are people reacting to it, how does it make them feel, does it excite you, does it make you want to move your body? I mean, these are all important factors in, is it a good take or not?
You
You
see, this
know?
is the kind of depth that I feel like this is a nice place to polish up this podcast on, because the more detailed you can get on that, like the more value it is for everybody listening. I mean, that's really important stuff you've just talked about there. I think that many times people get, we can overlook that and forget, by overcomplicating the whole thing, you forget
Yeah,
that when we're a 2-year old and we hear something that makes us want to dance and we just move, how instinctive that is as a part of our nature, and that's where music really
right,
comes from, right? There's an organic component. But then as we become artists and we maybe go down the professional route, you start to ask yourself those questions, and they're perfectly valid questions. I mean, it's great to be humble enough to care to even ask them, but then you still
right,
have to kind of come back to those simple answers, but understand how to be effective in your mindset in that room, in that environment.
right.
So is
Well,
there
and
is there
also,
anything you'd add to that on top of
well,
the?
yes, I would say also part of the job is, I love this Miles Davis quote where he said, sometimes it takes a long time to sound like yourself. Meaning, when I was growing up, I was listening to records and trying to do that, I'm building my
Yeah.
vocabulary, stealing from a Rolling Stones record, stealing from a Rush record, stealing from a blues record. And you have this vocabulary, and then you put it together and you steal it, straight up steal it.
Yeah.
But the way I use it and how I place it in another song is my sound. And so over the years, you get to sound like yourself. And that's a beautiful gift, to where you find your own sound, and if you can inject that into a song, then, I mean, that's a beautiful thing,
I don't know who quoted this, which is a shame because it's a really cool quote. But I remember hearing this quote somewhere along the way where he said, somebody said something along the lines of, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." And I think
Picasso.
it was Picasso, right? And it was
Yeah.
like really clever, because you think of stealing. What is that in the musical sense? It's the fact that you would never know where it came from. You would never be able to identify its origin necessarily. You may have an idea, but a good artist, you can immediately tell where it came from because it hasn't really gone through any evolution necessarily.
Well, that's another technique I use
Yeah.
is, I believe the Beatles are as great as they were because, well, they were great, but they were also great thieves, and they were great music fans. So McCartney was like taking chords from like classical music
Yeah.
or show tunes and
Yeah.
putting it in a pop song that that no other pop song had that chord in it. It was a very
Yeah.
unique chord. And so it's interesting to me. The art is to conceal the art, to
Yeah.
steal something and put it in a place where you wouldn't think it would normally go. Like, to me, the worst thing a genre of music can do, say country music,
Yeah.
if you're making country music but you're just being inspired by other country music,
Yeah.
then eventually it's going to get stale.
Yeah.
To me, what's exciting is I will play on a country record, and I know that I stole this drum part from a Bowie song,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'm putting it in a country song, and nobody knows that I stole it from a Bowie song, but I totally stole it from a Bowie song. And then all of a sudden, this country song has a freshness that it didn't have before, because
Yeah.
I'm not just playing, a Johnny Cash drum beat. I'm playing a David Bowie drum beat on
Or Johnny Cash too.
so that's a perfect example of part of the strategy of coming up with a drum part. Like,
Yeah.
everything I've played, I've stolen from somewhere, but how I use it and where I place it is my sound.
Yeah.
That's where my personality comes out,
I love that. And that's a really wonderful. I mean, we could go on for hours on this stuff. I mean, I'm super hyped up as I'm talking to you. I mean, there's so much more I would ask you. Maybe we'll have to, I always say this, but maybe we'll have to do a follow up at some point down the line. I know that you're
Fuck yeah.
continuing to do your awesome podcast, so I'm sure you're going to say something on "Hi, my name is Matt." Somewhere down the line, there's going to be another podcast that we can maybe discuss further on Drummers Universe. And
Yeah, I mean, I just started
yeah,
doing it, and this is episode 5, the lightning in the bottle episode on recording a drum track. But I've done, the first episode was me taking acid in my first recording session. The second one was, I got so lost after high school. I had no college degree. I didn't even have a high school degree. I just eventually stopped going.
yeah,
And I was lost, and I was working construction. I'm like, well, this sucks. So I saved money and I went to Africa to just travel around, because I knew I couldn't afford to travel through Europe. I had like $2,000. So I got a plane ticket and I went to Africa, and I lived off like $15 a day. And I went around playing drums with tribes. Like, I could have, I could have died. Like, I was there for 3 months with a backpack. And
wow,
I noticed that I thought I was going to go there and learn all these like African rhythms and then come back and blow people's minds. And what I realized was, there's no mystery to it. It's they use music differently than our Western ears. To us, it's mostly entertainment. But in Africa, all these tribes, it's part of their tradition and folklore. The rhythms say something. There's a rhythm for a funeral. There's a rhythm for a birth. Every event has a different rhythm to it. So
yeah,
in a sense, they can communicate with it. So when I sat down with the tribes first, I was playing all this like, Gene Krupa,
okay,
and I
yeah,
was doing all this kind of, and they just started laughing at me. Now, they weren't laughing at me like I sucked. They were laughing at me like, if music, or if rhythm is a language, then I was just speaking fancy gibberish.
Gotcha.
And like I wasn't saying anything. I was just playing things that sounded impressive, but I wasn't saying anything. Whereas what they were saying was telling
Right.
a long story that's, hundreds of years old, and they all knew the story.
Gotcha.
So I came back really realizing that different people hear music differently, and it serves a different purpose depending where you are in the world. You know.
You know what? That story just even further iterates why you think the way you do in the work that you've done. Because I mean, it may be that formative experience that you had in going out there had a big influence in the way that you perceive and look at how parts should be written and the place of a part. I mean, it's such an organic approach in those
Well, I
environments.
look at it as like there's no right or wrong way when you're making art.
Yeah,
I try not to look at things as good or bad
yeah,
or right or wrong, and instead I look at it as, and this is the way I look at life now: useful or not useful.
yeah.
Like say politics, for instance. There's a lot to be outraged about, but is it
Hmm.
useful for me to be outraged about it? If it
Yeah,
is, then I will be. If it's not, then I won't be. I have to let it go. And so
yeah.
I use that with creating too. Is this useful or not useful? And so people worry about, but my third episode was about creating art. And I found that don't be afraid of failure,
Mm.
because all of my greatest lessons in life and in music have been through the failures, not the successes. I don't learn shit from a good time. I'm too busy having it. But when I failed, the question is, what did I learn from that?
Yeah.
The failures are they can be the most educational. And so don't be afraid of them. Just quickly move on from them and learn from it. There's only two kinds of days: good days and growth days. There's no bad days. You know.
Love that.
Did
I
you
don't
just
know.
put balloons on me?
I didn't know that just happened naturally. It's like because you said maybe you said when you said growth days, maybe Zoom assumed that you said birthdays and decided
Growth
to throw.
days,
So I think
birthdays. Wait a minute.
I don't know why I did that. It's so weird. I've got a
All of
drum
a sudden I have
student.
balloon.
Yeah, it was so weird. It just randomly happened. I don't know what's
I
going
know.
on with Zoom these days. I've got a student who every now and again it gets a thumbs up appear on his screen, and we still don't know why. Like I don't know why.
Well,
One
let
of
me
my
try
students
something.
every time he's like, "Yeah, yeah," he'll be talking something random, and then this thumb will just come up, and we'll be like, "Well, thanks for your, thanks for your
Let me
contribution
do an
to the
experiment.
conversation, Zoom."
Let me do an experiment. Happy birthday. Nope.
No. So why then? Why Zoom? Why did that happen?
Congratulations.
No.
Nothing.
Who knows? I'm gonna have
Who
to
knows?
research this now.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I
you know
don't.
what, Matt?
I like
It
it.
has been a absolute. It's been a fantastic time. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and
Thank you. I feel the same. Thank you for having me.
it's been wonderful. And I've got to go and check out your podcast now. I highly recommend everybody else do the same. And definitely look into Matt Tecu's background. I mean, it's very easy to look you up. There's plenty of on the internet about your background of what you've done, and you've done a lot of you've been a as a professional drummer. I know that because you've done a lot of work across the board. You've done a lot of endorsements as well, right? So there's you can find his bio not in multiple locations.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I'm a
you
Pisces guy. I just got a Rogers endorsement. I'm
yeah,
playing Dunette snares,
that's right.
innovative percussion drumsticks. So yeah, I'm plugged in.
Yeah,
But honestly, let me tell you something. So
yeah.
people don't think I'm trying to tell you that I know what I'm doing. Every time I sit down behind the drum set, almost every time, my first thought, this is just the way my brain works,
Hmm.
is I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. And I hope today isn't the day they all find out that I don't know what
Yeah,
I'm doing. But luckily, my second thought is, yeah, but you've been doing this a long time. So just be yourself. And, you showed
yeah,
up on time, be yourself, have fun, So
yeah.
that's it.
Is there
That's my
any
recommendation to everybody. Enjoy
well,
yourself.
just to wrap this up as well? Obviously, you've got your podcast to go and check out, and I know that I've got them right here. You've got such a long list of artists that you work with, so it's like picking your favorite child, which is impossible. But what would you if you were going to recommend a record for someone to just go and check out, or a couple of records just to check out some of your work
Oh,
over the
I
years,
can't, I
would
can't, because
you?
there's too many, you know, like
Yeah.
like I can't even
So
tell
what?
you what my favorite color is,
Of
or my
course you can't.
favorite food, or my favorite season. It depends on my mood, and my mood's always changing because I'm a
Of
moody
course.
bastard.
So a
You
better
know,
question then maybe would be, what would be a most recent record that you've done that they could check out, and what would be one of the oldest, just to
I
see a bit
just
of
did
your
a
journey?
record that I found interesting, from Rebecca Pigeon,
Hmm.
who is she was an actress and singer-songwriter, and she's married to the great playwright David Mamet. And we just did an album of hers that I found very interesting, and it's very oh, what's her name? You're running up that hill. You're running. Dun,
Kate
dun,
Bush.
dun. Yes, it's very Kate Bush like, and so meaning it's eclectic. Like, what kind of music is Kate Bush? It's
Mm.
Kate Bush music. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
It's
There's
just
only one
it's like
Kate.
what kind of
Yeah,
music is Bowie music? It's Bowie
yeah,
music. I don't know.
yeah.
So I did that and was very excited. I did her last two records. She put out two records in a year and a half. So check that out, and it's just got some really creative, weird drum parts. She let me do whatever I want, so I got
Oh,
weird.
amazing.
You know,
Oh, great.
yeah.
Awesome. What was the name of that record again?
Songs of LA is the new one.
Songs of
And
LA.
then I just came out with an album from the Americana kind of country funk artist Sam Morrow. And
Tomorrow.
and what's the name of the new record? I can't even remember. I just got the vinyl in the mail the other day, but it's very kind of funky country, like Little Feat kind of. We call it funky tonk, and that's where I got to be like real funky, and but yet very Americana. I'm doing more Americana kind of root stuff. I just finished an album with Sugar Ray Rayford, who's a
Yeah.
soul singer, soul blues, and that'll be coming. I think they just put out a single, and his full album will be coming out soon. But
Awesome. Yeah, I saw that
but
one from Sugar Ray Rayford. What was the
yeah, that
name of
I
that
got
album again? It
nominated. The
was
last one got nominated for a Grammy. So yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Massive congratulations, my friend, for all the
Thank you,
all the journey that you've had and all the hard work you've put in over the years.
thank
It's
you.
been wonderful hearing about your perspective as well as the stories you have to tell. Because a lot of the stories you share, they have some kind of meaning or purpose that's very enjoyable for us to sort of figure. You know, it's nice to learn from something as you hear it. But it's been great. It's been really lovely hearing your
Well,
perspective
thank you.
on
Let
the
me just
things.
add one thing, because that I learned years ago that there's this singer, Janova Magnus, who I toured and did a bunch of records with, and she said,
Mm,
the job is not music.
mm,
The job is connecting.
yeah.
Music is just the vehicle we use to do it.
Oh, that's
That's the
beautiful.
vehicle we
Yeah.
use to get there. And so all the things you're saying, I'm like, well, I hope I connected,
Yeah.
that I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to be as
I think you
authentic
do.
as I
Although
can.
it's a very humble thing to say. I think after, the long journey you've said, you definitely have a lot of knowledge,
I'm
but
just
it's not.
trying to be myself,
Yeah,
and
exactly. But it's not from a place of egotism or a desire to be clever or above anything. I mean, it's just, that comes through in your energy, and that's one of the reasons why you probably one of the big reasons why you've been able to have so much work, because you're not bringing any uh, of an egotistical edge to the situation. You're bringing an openness and a kindness and yeah, you just want to provide value and serve, and I think that's
thanks, man. Yeah,
that's
every day's a
beautiful.
gift. Every day's
Yeah,
every day's a gift.
yeah,
I believe that one of the greatest tools I've learned, and it's almost like a light switch on a wall. It's gratitude.
yeah.
So whenever I'm feeling bad about myself or sorry for myself, to me, gratitude is the foundation that all other virtues are built upon. So I'm very grateful to be here talking with you. I'm very grateful to do what I do. Grateful to still be alive, and I don't know. Let's enjoy life. You
Love
know.
it.
Yeah.
On that note, let's wrap up this convo for this time, and I think we'll have to do a part two one of these days. So, but thank you
Yeah.
so
Okay.
much,
Well,
Matt.
last
Thank you for
note.
being here.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. The podcast is called Hi, My Name is Matt.
Yep.
And the fifth episode, Lightning in a Bottle, will be coming out. I think I'm going to release it right after we're done here. I'm just
Okay.
going to post it.
Amazing. That's great. So by the time you see this podcast, because there'll be a bit of editing, you may be that I assume the podcast should already be available on your place. Is that on your?
By that time,
your
my
channel?
episode will have changed your life.
So you should be able, as you see this video, you should be able to very easily just go and find it. So it should be out there ready for you to go and enjoy. But thanks again, Matt. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.